ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। अरुणाचल शिवा अरुणाचल शिवा अरुणाचल शिवा अरुणाचल ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। By reciting these mantras, our spiritual level is raised to very high level, and the words come out of this mouth are of very real nature. So, dear friends, today I am giving you a video on Arunachala Akshara Manamalai of Maharishi Sri Bhagwan Ramna. So I start the video. Most of Bhagwan Sri Ramna's compositions were written in answer to a query put, a doubt raised, or a request made by some devotee or other. Some of them came out of him as the expression of an inner urge. He was no author in the ordinary sense of the term. The truth he saw, he revealed to those who wanted to have a glimpse of it. When Sri Ramana was staying at the Virupaksha cave on the Arunachala hill, the devotees who were then with him desired that he should compose a song which they could sing while going out for begging alms. But there was no response then. Subsequently, however, when he was walking round the sacred hill one day with devotees following him, the litany Arunachala Aksarmanamalai, being divinely inspired, welled forth from him spontaneously. Referring to the manner of this composition, he himself later on said that it was not the result of any premeditation or conscious cogitation, but that it came out of his heart unexpectedly and spontaneously. Of the hymns on Arunachala composed by Sri Ramana, the Arunachala Akshara Manamalai was the earliest. The very name Arunachala had fascinated Sri Ramana right from his childhood. It was in search of Arunachala that he had left his home as a lad of 17. In the note that he left behind, he had stated that he was going in quest of his father and that no one need go after him. After arriving at Tiruvannamalai, he stayed there till the end of his earthly life. To him, Arunachala was no mere hill. It is the visible symbol of the Absolute Spirit. He found no contradiction between his Advaita experience and devotion to Arunachala. In fact, There can be no opposition between jnana and bhakti at the highest level. That view which holds that there is no place in Advaita for either God or devotion is clearly mistaken. There is an old Sanskrit verse which says that it is by the grace of God that even the inclination towards Advaita comes to a few. What is called God in the language of religion and mysticism is the same as the absolute of Advaita. In bridal mysticism, the devotee considers himself to be the bride of God. He employs the intimate language of love in conversing with his Lord. All the processes connected with carnal love are observed to take place between the devotee's soul and the bridegroom, except the carnality. The devotee pins for cringes, cajoles, chides, and quarrels with the beloved. There are courtship, union, separation, and reunion. In that phase of mysticism, which is known as bridal mysticism, the mystic revels in the love play with the divine. The culmination of this sadhana, however, is the realization of non duality. Love is never satisfied so long as the dualistic consciousness lasts. Where two-ness is, there is no true love. Love is oneness. Ananda is Advaita. The Atma is Rasa. In Sri Ramna's love litany, we have this clearly taught. Even in the first verse of the hymn, he speaks of the I am Arunachala experience. When love matures and realizes itself, there is nothing but Arunachala. Arunachala is all is Arunachala. This is the plenary experience which is Advaita. The title of this lyric poem, Arunachala Akshara Manamalai, means the bridal garland of letters for Arunachala. Manamalai is the wedding garland which symbolizes the union of the bride with the bridegroom. It also means sweet scented garland. The poem is called Akshara Manamalai because the initial letters of the verses of the hymns are in the alphabetical order. Akshara Manamalai may also mean the garland that serves as the insignia of marriage with the undecaying, that is Akshara. Akshara means that is not destroyed. Anything which is not destroyed is known as Akshara. Lord, the phrase contains the name of Bhagwan Sri Ramana too, Akshara Ramana. It is significant that the hymn is composed of 108 verses, a number that is supremely sacred. Innovation. As I offer the bridal garland of letters to the Lord Arunachala, protect me, grace bestowing Ganpati, by extending a lifting hand. This is an invocation to Ganpati, the remover of all obstacles. The invocation is made so that the purpose of this poem may be fulfilled, viz., to bring about the union of the soul with God, or in other words, to effect the realization of the non difference of the Jiva from Brahma. The bridegroom Var is Arunachala. The phrase can also be taken to mean Arunachala Hara. The bride is the devotee's soul. The latter longs to meet the Lord and become one with Him. In order to symbolize this union, she makes a garland of letters and fervently hopes that this would be accepted by the Lord. Fearing that there may be obstacles in the way, she prays to Ganpati for success in her mission. Refrain. This is the mantra or theme of this grand litany. It is recited at the end of each verse. Even those who are not acquainted with the verses join in the recitation of this mantra in chorus. The mantra is Arunachala Shiva. Shiva is the most auspicious name of God. It itself means the auspicious Shiva. The formless appeared in many forms in order to bestow his grace on his devotees. At Tiruvannamalai, the form he assumed is that of light and fire, the light that reveals the truth, the fire that burns away all impurities. There is a legend according to which Shiva appeared as a column of light at this place, and Brahma and Vishnu failed to discover the top and bottom, respectively, of this column. The source of Linga worship is to be traced to this legend. The Linga is the symbol of the luminous Shiva, who has neither beginning nor end. The Arunachala hill is itself a linga of Shiva. It is believed that in Krita Yuga it was hill of fire, in Treta Yuga a hill of gems, in Dwapara Yuga a hill of gold, and that in Kali Yuga it has become a hill of stone. To mark the association of the hill with fire, a lamp is lit at its top once a year. Arunachala, the fire hill, is the symbol of the immutable reality. To the devotee, Arunachala is the bridegroom. O Arun, now first verse meaning. O Arunachala, dost root out the anxiety of those who think I am verily Arunachala. It is God's grace that leads to self realization. The culmination of devotion, bhakti to God lies in the realization of the non dual spirit. Arunachala, the Supreme God, is the self of the so called individual soul. What prevents the soul from realizing this fact is the ego, born of ignorance. The ego, the pseudo I, has usurped the place of the real I. Usurped means it has stolen. The real I, God, the soul, identifying itself with the ego, has estranged itself from God. The purpose of devotion is to remove this estrangement and bring about the recognition of God as the real I. The final realization is of the form I am Arunachala. I and the Father in heaven are one. Here the word I denotatively and connotatively means God and not the ego. The supreme identity is the end of even bhakti. In some of the bhakti schools, four paths are taught: the path of the servant, Dasa Marga, the path of the good son, Satputra Marga, the path of the friend, Sakha Marga, and the path of good union, San Marga. Here the grading is on the principle of lessening the distance between the devotee and the deity. The goal, therefore, must be the annihilation of even the least distance between the soul and God. In other words, the aim is the realization of the supreme identity. What stands in the way of this realization is the ego And what causes the ego to appear is ignorance. Devotion to God results in the destruction of ignorance, the root cause of the ego. Verse number 2. O Arunachala, like the words Ajgu, Tamil for beauty, and Sundra, Sanskrit for beauty, let me and thou be completely non different. Non-difference is the goal of bhakti. The so-called Jiva and Iswara are one in reality. The oneness of the two, however, is not as endowed with adjuncts but as free from them. The Jiva's ignorance makes for the difference. When the ignorance is removed, the oneness is realized. Arunachala and the Bhakta, God and soul are not two subspecies determinatis. An example of apparent difference and essential non-difference is given. The Tamil word Asgu means beauty. The Sanskrit word Sundara also means the same. One who knows either language alone may imagine that the two words have different meanings. Most language controversies arise out of ignorance. When one realizes the identical connotation of the two words, one would know that it is evil to be misled by difference in expression. Note. Asgu and Sundra were the names respectively of Sri Ramna's mother and father. Verse number 3. O Arunachala, what a wonder this that thou didst enter my mind and rescuing me holdest, holdest me captive in the cave of thy heart. The mind which is but a cluster of desires. The mind which is but a cluster of desires and the home of unrest is the Jiva's residence. The either of the heart which is unsullied and pure is the place of the Lord. It is in the cave of the heart that he is said to be hidden. Guhatita. His saving grace makes him lift the soul out of the swallow of despond and draw her into his home, the heart which is the hall of bliss. The Lord expects nothing in return. His benignity knows no bargain, even under the slightest pretext. He is prepared to save the soul. In her empirical state, the soul is a captive of the roving mind. By the grace of the Lord, she is liberated from the mind's torture and is afforded safely and protection. This sanctuary of my soul, unwitting I keep white and whole, unlatched and lit, if thou should not care to enter or to tarry there. Sri Ramana left his parental home as a boy of 17, being rescued by Arunachala and remained unwaveringly thereafter at Tiruvannamalai. Verse number 4. O Arunachala, for whose sake didst thou rescue me? If now thou dost reject me, the world will accuse thee. God saves the soul by bestowing His grace upon her for no purpose of His own. He has nothing to accomplish, no end to achieve. It is for the soul's sake that He rescues her from bondage. Having rescued her, He will protect her forever. But the devotee soul is in doubt, having had to pay bitterly for her association with her fleeting companions, the denizens of the world, and having now regained the grace of the Lord. She is apprehensive that divine protection may be withdrawn from her. So she appeals to the good sense of her Lord. Do not reject me, saying, "You are no good. You have this defect and that." Having drawn me unto you, it is not proper that you should send me away. If you desert me, what will be the whole think of you? It will certainly blame you, and you pretty well know that it is interested in blaming you, and is only looking for a chance, at least for the fear of public opinion. You should not be inconstant to me. Verse number 5. O Arunachala, save thyself from this accusation. Why didst thou make me pine for thee, who will hereafter leave thee? The devotee soul is jealous of the reputation of the Lord. She would not bear to think that he, the most compassionate one, should be accused of harshness and desertion. Look at her own plight. If she had not been rescued at all, there would be no problem. She would have continued to enjoy the delights of the world, imagining that they constituted happiness. But the Lord has created in her a taste for the infinite by revealing Himself to her, and she has learned to pine for Him. Even the soul's ability to pine for Him is the result of His grace. Having now been accepted by Him, how can the devotee leave Him? As a Vasavana saint puts it, addressing the Lord, how can the soul that has taken refuge in your lotus feet, which yield immortality, desire anything else? When the lotus bloom is there filled with honey, the bee will not cast even as much as a glance at the sugarcane stalk. Verse number 6. O Arunachala, thou art one who showers grace which is greater than that of one's own mother. In this, then, thy grace, or such indeed is thy grace. The finest example in the world of love that is pure and unselfish is that of the mother. She is prepared and always ready and willing to make any sacrifice for the sake of her child. The child's welfare is her only concern. She is utterly indifferent to and unmindful of what may happen to herself. To the devotee, God is more than a mother. He is all grace and compassion. Dayamaya, an ocean of unbargaining love. Kripa Jalanidhi. He showers his grace without let or hindrance. He expects nothing from the devotee soul, nor even her allegiance. He creates the cosmos, protects it, and periodically withdraws it in order to enable the soul to progress and eventually gain the greatest possible benefit, that is, liberation. Advert, adverting to the fear expressed in the previous verse. The devotee soul now points out to the Lord that if he were to desert her, it would not be in keeping with his loving nature, which is even finer than that of a mother. So the devotee asks, is this thy grace? Or the words Iduvo Wundrul may be taken to mean, such indeed is thy grace, a grace that is greater than that of a mother. The Lord of the rock temple at Tiruchirappalli bears the name Matru Bhuteswara Tayamanuvar, the one who came as the mother. Verse number 7. O Arunachala, be thou firmly seated in my heart so that it may not run away, duping thee. The pranks that the mind plays and the ways that it adopts for deceiving itself are well known. Ordinarily, the mind moves out through the sense channels and gets distracted and dissipated. It is centrifugal in its tendency and allows itself to be dragged in different directions at the same time. The taming of the mind is a hard task. The disciplines that are prescribed in the sacred texts are designed to subdue the mind and make it one pointed. It is easy to perform miracles such as walking on water or sitting on fire, says a Tamil saint. It is easy to accomplish such difficult feats as making the elephant and tiger do one's bidding. But that skill is hard whereby one controls one's mind and sits still. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna complains to Sri Krishna. Unsteady verily is the mind, turbulent, tenacious, and strong to control. It is as difficult, I think, as it is to curb the wind. Sri Krishna agrees with Arjuna and says, without doubt, the mind is difficult to subdue and unsteady, but it can be controlled through practice and dispassion. In the Sivananda Lahari, Sri Sankara likens the mind to the monkey that jumps from one branch of a desire to another, goes from one hill of passion to another, roams about in the forest of delusion, and is extremely active and mischievous. Addressing Shiva as the prince of beggars, Kapalin, he says, take this monkey as my arm gift to you, after tying it firmly with the rope of bhakti. The purpose of devotion is to sublimate the mind and make it one pointed. Prahlada prays to Narsimha. The love that the ignorant bear for the objects of sense, may that love that flows towards you as I contemplate you remain constant without leaving my heart. In the present verse, the Lord is implored to sit tight in the heart so that the heart may not go astray. Even the Lord has to be vigilant and keep constant watch over the doings of the heart. The heart may run away if the hold on it is slackened even a little. It is deceitful and may want to deceive even God, deceiving you. If the words are split as Unneye Matri, the phrase would mean changing or transforming even you. Verse number 8. O Arunachala, reveal thy beauty so that the mind which is by nature roving may get quiescent, seeing the uninterruptedly. The mind runs without rest. It revolves round the objects of sense, imagining that its happiness lies there. As desires arise, it seeks to fulfill them, hoping to derive satisfaction that way. But the more it gets, the less contemplate it becomes. The faster it runs, the more it re- the more restless it finds. All this mad rush for sense objects is born out of a false view which presents those objects in an attractive way. It is the bliss that is the self, Atmananda, that is reflected in the objects, Vishyananda. And it is this reflection that fascinates the mind. The shadow is mistaken for the substance, the dry bones for the juicy flesh. The mind gets disappointed each time it gains its wish, yet the lesson is repeatedly forgotten, and the same story of striving, gaining, and losing goes on. In order that the mind may be weaned from sense objects, God is implored to reveal His beauty. In truth, there is no beauty other than God. The so called beautiful objects of the world are but pale reflections of the splendor that is God, broken arcs of the perfect orb. God is Bhuvana Sundara, the beauty that can ravish the entire world. He is Rasa, the sweetness that surpasses every taste. Brahmananda, the bliss that is without limit. Nitya Nitatisaya Sukha, happiness that is never excelled. The saints who have seen God have described him as a Manmatha Manmatha, the Cupid of Cupid, and Madana Mohana, the beauty of beauty. For the sake of saving souls by enticing them, God is born in the world as Avatara. The names of sub-avatars as Rama and Krishna indicate their purpose also, which is to bring delight into the hearts of beings. Shiva as Sundresha, the Lord of Beauty, is said to have performed his sports in Madurai, the city of sweetness, so that all might be happy. Sometimes God taken an awful form in order to show that there is beauty even in ugliness. Looking at the Narsimha, man lion form of the Lord, Lakshmi began to shudder and was afraid to approach it. But the boy Prahlada danced with joy, ran to the Lord and sat on his lap. Sri Krishna revealed to Arjuna his cosmic form, Visvarupa, after granting him the divine eye, Divya Chaksu. Arjuna could not stand the sight of the Ghora Rupa, frightful form, for long and prayed to Sri Krishna to resume his normal and usual form. In order to captivate even the ordinary mind, God has to take a comely form. It is then that the mind is likely to leave its vain pursuit of the fleeting pleasures of the world and lie quietly contemplating the beauty that is God. Verse number 9. O Arunachala, if thou dost not join me now, destroying my equity, is this thy manliness? The devotee soul appeals to Lord to join her and make her his own. She has come of age and is now mature. She has also chosen the Lord as her consort and would think of no one else. It is now time for him to come and take her under his protection. Not being able to bear isolation anymore, she cries out to the Lord, imploring him to come. It is only He, the bridegroom, that can destroy the soul's virginity, which is equity. The devotee soul takes the liberty of rebuking the Lord, saying that if he does not do his part, he would forfeit his title to Purushottam being the supreme male. Verse number 10. O Arunachala, why this sleep while others are dragging me? Does this become thee? The rivals to the Lord are the senses and their objects. They drag the soul even though they have no right to do so. The control over her is illegitimate, belonging to the class of not self as they do. They ought not to get into an alliance with the soul, But the ignorant soul, forgetting her spiritual nature, consorts with the senses and their objects. The latter hold her captive to their whims and fancies. When the soul realizes her sorry plight, she becomes a devotee and remembers that she belongs to the Lord. If she belongs to the Lord, why has he not come to her rescue? Has he gone to sleep? Why should he be indifferent when she is seduced by others? This is not fair. He has all the power and strength required to save her. So she rebukes her Lord. Why do you sleep when something that intimately belongs to you is being misused? This is an insult not so much to me as to you. You are the Lord, and it is your inalienable duty, inalienable duty to safeguard my honor. Verse number 11. O Arunachala, when the five senses, the thieves, entered my heart, wert thou not in my heart? The five senses are here compared to thieves. A thief is one who deceitfully takes away what does not belong to him. The soul is not a property of the senses, yet the senses take her away. The senses storm the heart, enter it by force, and snatch away the soul. But how can this happen? Was not the omnipotent Lord there in the heart? If he were there, how dared the senses to trespass? It is not possible that they have power over the authority of the Lord. Being present in the heart, he could not be sleeping, for he is ever wakeful. He is all seeing, always. Sarvadriksada. Shall we say that he was not present? But how can that be, since he is present everywhere? In the following Sanskrit verse, the passions are compared to thieves, desire, anger, and greed. These thieves reside in the body in order to steal the wisdom gem. Therefore, be awake, be awake. Verse number 12. O Arunachala, deceiving thee, who art one without a second, who will come in? This indeed is thy guile. If it is not possible to assume either that the Lord was not asleep or that he was not absent when the sense thieves entered the heart, what is the conclusion one is inevitably led to? It is this wish that all this is the Lord's Maya. He cannot be deceived. Who or what is there to deceive him, since he is all? He is one without a second. The world of plurality is his play. The world drama, including the dance of the senses, must therefore be his device for awakening the soul from her stupor. One of his appellations is that he is the stage manager of the drama of deceit. Kapta Natka Sutra Dharin. The, the Staradvya called him the Lord of Thieves. Taskramanpati. Verse number 13. O Arunachala, thou art the meaning of the sacred syllable Om. Thou art without an equal or superior. Who can understand thee? By innumerable names has God been designated. To signify this is usually said that he has 1,000 names. Of all these names, the most appropriate is the sacred syllable Om, called Parnava. Parnava is his name, says the Yoga Sutra. The Mandukya Upanishad begins by saying, Om is all this, what was, what is, and what will be. It is also what transcends the threefold time. The sound Om consists of three letters or matras, A, U, N. This is also a fourth part which is soundless amatra. The three letters stand respectively for the three manifestations of the self, both in the order of individual existence and in the order of cosmic appearance. The self is Visva, Tejasa, Prajna of the waking, dream, and sleep states respectively, and Virat, Hiranyagarbha, and Avakrita, the cosmic counterparts. Om is what is beyond these as well as also their inner reality, Turiya, the fourth. Om is the name of the nameless. It is a name and yet not a name. Hence, it is the nearest to the nameless reality. The absolute reality has no form, but limited and formed as we are. We have assigned myriads of forms to it. Myriad means many. Of all these representations, the linga is the most appropriate because it has form and yet no form. While the other representations have their particular names, the linga signifies simply the sign or symbol. The origin of the linga is traced to the column of light in the form of which God appeared as Arunachala. So the original linga is Arunachala. What linga is among spatial representations of God that Om is among his names. Arunachala is thus the meaning of the sacred syllable Om. Since Arunachala is all, there is nothing that is equal to him, nor anything that is superior to him. He is not one among many, he is the one without a second. Addressing the Lord, Arjuna says in the Bhagavad Gita, there is no one equal to thee. How can there be anyone that is superior? The Vedanta teaches that God or the Absolute is the sole reality. It is not easy to understand this reality. Brahma is that whence speech and mind return, not being able to reach. It is the transcendent reality that defies description. It is that which the mind is powerless to understand, but which yields to mind the power of understanding. It is the mind of mind, the understanding of understanding. Verse number 14. O Arunachala, bestowing on me thy grace like a mother, to redeem me is thy duty. In verse 6, God was described as one who is more than a mother. Here again, there is the comparison with mother. A mother's love is the summit of human love. We who approach God from the human angle do naturally apply to Him all that is best and noblest in human nature. Here is a prayer to God, and He should protect His devotee who is His child. God is the universal parent, He is the mother as well as the father. Saving the children is not an optional function of the parent. It is her duty. So the devotee reminds God of what is but his duty, a duty not imposed on him by an external authority, but one which is his own ordinance. The expression unvaipol may also be taken to mean as on mother, when the interpretation of the text would be this: as you bestowed grace on mother, so bestow it on me too and save me. That is your duty. The reference here is to the story of Parvati gaining half the body of Shiva at Arunachala. Verse 15. O Arunachala, being the eye of the eye, without eye thou seest. Who can see thee see? Of all the sense organs, as the saying goes, the most important is the eye. What light is for the external world, that the eye is for the living individual. The eye is even more important than light, for what is the use of light if there be no eye to see? The eyes may be wide open and in a sound condition, but if the mind be absent, they cannot see. While without the eyes, the mind can see. Without the mind, the eyes cannot see. In dreams, the physical organs do not function, but the mind creates its own organs and causes experience. The mind, too, is not an independent light, it borrows luminosity from the self. In sleep, the mind does not function, yet there is experience, the experience of the non existence of objects. That experience is the self. God is the self. The eye that never fails. As Sri Ramana says in the 40 verses on existence, the self is the endless eye. Antamilak Khan. In the present verse, he observes that Arunachala is the eye of the eye, answering a question about the moving power behind the sense organs and mind. The Kena Upanishad seeks to indicate the nature of that power which is Brahma by saying that it is the ear of the ear, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech, the breath of the breath, the eye of the eye. The third eye assigned to Lord Shiva is a symbol of the fact that the Supreme is the eye of the eye. The eye derives its ability to see from God, but God does not depend on the eye for seeing. God sees without the help of the eye. God, the self, is pure experience. He makes all experience possible, but he himself is not an object of experience. Only the conditioned can be experienced. The unconditioned is never an experienced content. Here, Sri Ramana asks, who can see thee? Verse 16. O Arunachala, like magnet which attracts iron, thou shouldst draw me and without letting me go, be in union with me. One of the familiar similes for bhakti devotion is the attraction of iron filings by magnet. This figures as one of the five found in a verse of Shivananda Lahiri. The seeds of the Ankola tree on falling to the ground go and attach themselves to the trunk of the tree. The needle sticks to the magnet. The chaste woman thinks constantly of her Lord. The creeper winds itself onto a tree. The river flows unceasingly towards the ocean. When the mind in a similar way remains at the feet of God without moving from there even for a moment, that is bhakti. The point to be noted about the simile of the magnet is that without itself moving, the magnet draws the needle unto itself. The nature of the needle is such that it gets influenced by the magnet. God is the unmoving Achyuta principle, yet his influence moves the devotee's soul, who in turn seeks him alone to the exclusion of all other ends. Here in this verse, the soul longs to lose herself in the being of God. She implores her Lord to engulf her so that there may be no individuality left in her. The union viewed from the side of the soul is sometimes compared to that of water with water, milk with milk. Verse 17. O Arunachala, ocean of grace in the form of a hill, graciously bestow thy grace on me. The Lord appeared as the hill of light. The analogy of the hill is designed to remind us of the majesty, magnificence, and magnitude of God. The splendor of Arunachala is immeasurable. He is beyond the reach of speech and mind. Even the gods could not gauge his greatness. He seems to stand afar, towering over everything. He is transcendent, yet he is immanent. There is nothing nearer than he, for he is the self of all. He is the vast sea of mercy, the ocean of grace. The mythical milk ocean is the symbol of benignity and benevolence. God is compared to the ocean by virtue of his graciousness and goodness. If he is the height of wisdom, he is the depth of feelings also. He encamp, encompasses all, engulfs all. It is on his grace that all subsist. There is no prayer that is more efficacious or noble than the one for the descent of his grace. People often pray for petty things. This is no doubt better than not praying at all. But the best prayer is that which is not motivated by the spirit of the market. One ought to pray because one ought to. Grace is the complement of prayer. The devotee soul prays to God for nothing but God who is grace, and the prayer itself is made possible because of grace. Verse 18. O Arunachala, the gem that shines below, above everything, do destroy my baseness. To us of the plains, the mountain top is above and the ocean bed below. Limited as we are, we make such distinctions as high and low, far and near, before and after, good and bad. To God, however, who is omnipresent and all pervading, there are no distinctions whatsoever. He is the same everywhere, always, and in all things. In fact, there is no other to him. He is the one without a second. He is the self-luminous consciousness. Here the comparison to the luminous gem. Its light does not discriminate between one and another, although it is highly precious. God, the Atma, is Swan self-luminous. In the words of Upanishad, it is below and above, it is before and behind, it is to the south and to the north. The self is all this. Although the self-effulgent intelligence is always there, we close our eyes and complain that we do not see. Nescience, avidya, blinds us. It is the root of all evil and sin. It constitutes the basic baseness. The devotee soul appeals to God for the removal of avidya. She reminds him of his promise. Surrendering all dharmas, seek refuge in me alone. I will release you from all sins. Do not grieve. Verse 19. O Arunachala, destroying my sins completely, save me by making me good. O thou that signest in the form of the Master, destroy my baseness, pleaded the devotee soul with the Lord in the previous verse. The same plea is repeated here. The basic baseness is nescience with avidya. Here it is referred to as sin or defect. Kutram. Nescience is the root of all other sins. Nescience means ignorance, avidya. Seva Siddhanta enumerates three primary defects of the soul: Annava, Maya, and Karma. In Advaita Vedanta, three generations of defects are often mentioned: avidya, kama, and karma. Karma consists of the deeds that we do and their residual impressions. Desire, kama, is the seed of this. It is in its turn is the result of the wrong identification of the self with egoity, etc., which is nescience, avidya, or ignorance, ajnana. Thus, nescience is the original sin, mula mala. All other sins will vanish only when nescience is completely destroyed. Science is compared to the darkness that blinds, the note that binds, etc. Wisdom is the light that will dispel this darkness, the sword that will cut this note. It is by the grace of God that wisdom is gained. Wisdom is the supreme good. To use a saying of Socrates, knowledge is virtue. The natural goodness of the soul is revealed when the defects are removed. God removes the defects functioning as the Guru. The word Guru means the one who destroys the darkness of ignorance. The one who destroys ignorance cannot be himself subject to ignorance. This is God, the Supreme Self, God, Guru, Atma. These are but the different forms of one and the same reality, the reality that as the world teacher is called Dakshina Murti, the truth that is all the pervading like the ether. Verse number 20. O Arunachala, without letting me fall to the wiles of those who are cruel and deceitful, bestow thy grace on me and be in union with me. The world is too much with us. We fall into its wiles, not knowing that that way lies our doom. Our senses drag us away from what is good and permanent, the supreme self. Our mind becomes captive to the passing shows that only distract and demoralizes. The play of Maya deceives us, its agents, the objects spread a net as it were in which we are caught. Having made slaves of us, they harass and wreck us without mercy. Who can save the devotee soul from this sad plight but God, her Lord? So she appeals to him to come to her succor and save her from her dire distress. If only she could get reunited with her Lord through his grace, no harm would happen to her. Verse number 21. O Arunachala, although I implore thou as one deceitful, dost not show mercy, saying, do not fear, bestow grace on me. This is praise in the form of blame, ninda stuti. It is not that God is deceitful or that he is unmerciful. Arunachala has already been described as the ocean of grace. If the field has not been prepared and if the needs seeds do not sprout, it is not the fault of the gentle rain. The defects residue in the soul prevent the descent of grace. The devotee soul who has turned Godward realizes this fact and prays to the Lord for removal of the defects. In the course of her journey, she becomes impatient sometimes and accuses the Lord for her delay. Let him not even run immediately to the soul to save her. Let him at least give the assurance that she needs no fear. Let him promise her protection from fear. Abhya Pradana. Verse number 22. O Arunachala, bestow thy grace without tarnishing, thy blemishness, fame forgiving without asking. The devotee soul continues to invoke the grace of the Lord. In the case of an earthly Lord, one has often to ask explicitly what one wants from him. For one thing, he may not know what is wanted from him. For another, even if he knew, he may not be able to give it. The characteristic of a finite person is that he has little knowledge and less power. God, on the contrary, is omniscient and omnipotent. He knows the needs of all beings and has the power to satisfy them. Such indeed is his greatness. If he does not now come to the succor of the pining devotee soul, what will happen to that greatness? What will people think of Lord? Will they not either belittle his knowledge or accuse him of heartlessness? So, at least to safeguard his reputation, he should shower his grace on the devotee soul. Verse number 23. O Arunachala, grant thy grace that I may become mad with joy drinking thee, the genuine juice as from a fruit on the palm of one's hand. The fruit on the palm of one's hand is the usual simile for anything that is crystal clear and has been attained without doubt. The fruit that is ordinarily mentioned in this connection is the amalka, Amblic myrobalan. In the present context, however, a fruit like the grape would be more appropriate. God is compared to fruit juice because of his delight giving nature. He is the supreme essence, rasa. The Taittiriya Upanishad declares the essence is he. Having obtained the essence, one becomes happy. Who can breathe in or breathe out if this happiness in the heart ether were not? And it is He that brings in happiness. Verse number 24. O Arunachala, determined as thou art to kill thy devotees, how am I to survive after embracing thee? The goal of Advaita mysticism is the identity realization, which means the transcendence of even the devotee devoted relationship. This is the significance of the sentiment that God is determined to kill his devotees. The ego of the devotee is totally destroyed by God's grace. Thereafter, how could difference exist? Although we speak of spiritual marriage, there is good deal of difference between what we know as marriage and spiritual union. In the latter, there are no two entities, while the former requires two. There is no individuality left in the devotee soul after the divine embrace. The act of embracing the divine is a process of self noting. Sureshwara in his Brihadvartika makes the sage Yajnavalkya address the following verse to his wife Maitreyi. Impelled by her great love for Shiva, Parvati wrought herself into half his body, but you long for gaining the whole of my being with your whole self. Verse number 25. O Arunachala, thou art without anger and art endowed with all auspicious qualities. For thee to accept me as this target, what meritorious deed have I done, or what offense have I committed? God, the Absolute, has no qualities, but if qualities should be assigned to God, nothing that is despicable or evil can be attributed to him. For purposes of worship, he is regarded as endowed with all auspicious qualities. Passions such as anger, etc., do not belong to him. In our ignorance, we may imagine that God's act of destruction is born of his anger. But those who know the truth know that world destruction is the most benevolent act of God. As sleep is to the individual soul, so is cosmic dissolution to the entire creation of the Trinity of Godhead. The function of destruction is associated with Rudra, Shiva, and consequently some are inclined to characterize Rudra as the angry god. This, however, has no justification. Rudra is Shiva, the most auspicious and blissful divinity. In the august presence of Arunachala Shiva, the devotee soul realizes her imperfection. Yet, if she should have received the grace of Shiva, it must be that she feels due to some past merit. Divine grace is not measured out in accordance with the desire of the soul. If that were so, it would cease to be grace. All that God waits for is the proper attitude of receptivity on the part of the soul. When the soul has become mature in this sense, grace descends on her and transforms her. She then becomes God's target. The expression Korean Sedan may also be taken to mean what offense have I committed? then it would be praise in the form of blame, ninda, stuti. The devotee soul tells the Lord, what is the offense that I am guilty of? Why is it that you have chosen me as your target for destruction? So I stop the video here. Thank you for watching and listening this holy scriptures Akshara Manamalai. Please subscribe my channel. Thank you, my dear friends. Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva.